Hey everybody, welcome. This is the Rotary E-Club of Silicon Valley. Every week we try to bring you stories that will inspire you in some fashion, especially with our interests in innovation, entrepreneurship, and education. We're part of Rotary International. This is 1.2 million people around the world in 34,000 clubs seeking to make the world a better place in big and small ways. And our goal is to help by telling those stories that perhaps you have missed and that will give you the energy to go forth and do some great things over the coming week. This week, we will be hearing from Micah Shippee, Jesse Lubinsky, and Christine LionBailey, who together authored a book called Reality Bites, Innovative Learning Using Augmented and Virtual Reality. This is much more than just a prescription for coolness in a classroom, however. They are looking at this from the standpoint of what it may mean for training possibilities on all fronts. And we are excited to have all three of you here. So with that, I will hand it over to whoever is going first, which is Micah.
All right. Micah. Good morning, everyone. Thank you. Thanks for having us, Rushton. My name is Micah Shippee. I'm the CEO of Ready Learner One. We are a company of instructional designers who prides ourselves in reimagining learning, which is a very iterative process, as you can imagine. I'm joined today by Christine LionBailey and Jesse Lubinsky from our executive team, who will be speaking with you shortly. Like Rushton, we have a lot of experience in learning and training in both the corporate and education spaces. In both worlds, we've done work with leadership and legacy planning, even finding ourselves in some highly medically innovative companies, training with Fortune 500 companies, management and employee development. We do a lot of this reimagining in multiple spaces, and really what we like to think about is that we're working to bridge the gap between learner and content. And more about that from Christine.
Hey everybody, I'm Christine LionBailey. I'm the Chief Strategy Officer of Ready Learner One. So as Micah just mentioned, there's a lot of gaps between learners and content. And one of those biggest gaps is being driven right now by the disruption that's being caused by COVID-19. So we're going to talk a little bit about how business leaders and business people are feeling that gap, and what are some next steps and what are some resources that can be employed to sort of help alleviate that gap. So let's take a second to consider the challenges of the workplace that are presented by the current social distancing parameters that are in place. So one of the biggest issues is the sense of being disconnected, even though we live in a very connected world, being disconnected from colleagues and coworkers, and the challenge with really maintaining relationships, both work relationships that drive productivity, but also relationships that are critical to the hierarchy of a business. So for example, something that we once took for granted was simply walking across the office for a 1 to 2 minute quick conversation about something, or a meeting at the water cooler or whatever it may be. And those conversations now require a phone call that needs to be scheduled in advance and needs to jive with the busy work schedules and life schedules of the work from home environment. So what are some workflows that can be put in place to help alleviate that? The second major gap is the inconsistency with workflow approach, which leads to challenges with collaborative projects and projects that require multi-steps and multi-levels of the business. Many employers are struggling with how to support employee productivity, how to shift the approach to work in general, and how to maintain connectedness in the work culture. So we're here today to talk about and identify response approaches to addressing and filling the gaps that are presented by the current pandemic. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Micah, who's going to share a bit about Ready Learner One's expertise in adopting meaningful change that can help to alleviate some of these challenges.
Thanks, Christine. As you can imagine, as an emergent technology solutions company, we often find ourselves being approached by clients asking for the latest and greatest tools and how they can help them in their environment. And we try to have a very serious conversation about the purpose. Because, you know, one of our first responses, our knee-jerk, if you will, to a pandemic or a gap that arises through disruption is to go to integrate the latest and greatest. And integration is an important word. It kind of infers grabbing something from the outside and plugging it in. And so the conversation we often have is that what we really want people to do is adopt meaningful change, meaningful innovation in a meaningful manner. So we go through that process and the steps in that discussion by focusing on a user-oriented design. And I have a graphic I'm going to share with you. This is called the Performance Success Model. And this does an excellent job of conceptualizing the key attributes of success. This is done by human performance technologists This one specifically from Joe Arliss in the late 70s. So here you can see knowledge, skills, environment, motivation. If they're all positive and growing, it's going to lead to people's success at everything. If we remove knowledge and we give someone a new task that they have never, that don't have any background in, they're of course going to be anxious. If we put people in a place where they're required to have conversations like Christine said, but they don't have the skills to do it, they are going to be frustrated. If we put people in their homes and it's a work from home environment and there are children running around the house or their Wi-Fi is spotty, people are going to feel trapped and disconnected. And if we don't put people first and we don't meet users where they are and our learners where they are with what they have, the motivation drops and we're going to find a very apathetic workforce. So we at Ready Learner One push very hard for people, employees and clients to look to where people are first, help people with what they have knowledge about first, and then plan for the future. And part of that planning process is what Jesse's going to talk to us about.
Hi, my name is Jesse Lubinsky. I am the Chief Learning Officer of Ready Learner One. And you know, when you look at Micah's graphic, I think it's very informative in terms of the different scenarios he laid out for teaching and learning. And at Ready Learner One, you know, while we do have a focus, and Rushton mentioned that we have our book Reality Bites that talks about augmented and virtual reality and how we are an emergent technology focused company, the truth is, you know, a time like COVID-19 forces people to have to look toward emergent technology, but are they actually making that shift in a way that makes sense? And that goes for both when we talk about remote work and when we talk about remote learning. And so one thing we did was try to take a look at all the different learning and training initiatives from K-12 all the way up through corporate. And what we found was we recognized that they needed to be grounded in some type of framework that was easy for trainees to understand. And, you know, to Micah's last point, if there's no motivation, that leads to apathy. So if people are being forced to make that transition to a new technology, an emergent technology, and they're not, they don't understand what the purpose is as far as outcomes go, simply just to make that change, that leads to those negative outcomes. And so we developed a learning framework that we like to call the ABC framework. It's absorb, blend, and create. So we feel that when you're working with these emergent technologies, such as augmented and virtual reality, and this applies to numerous other technologies as well, that if you take a look at the experiences that you're undergoing through those technologies, they all fall under those three categories: absorbing, blending, and creating. And so by aligning those learning and training initiatives at the K-12 and corporate spaces to this type of framework, it makes it much easier to avoid some of the negative outcomes that you saw when Micah was kind of demonstrating what those different missing pieces could be. Because now, whether you're a learning designer, whether you're a trainer, whether you are the recipient of some type of training vehicle, you're going to have a much clearer understanding of what the desired outcomes are and why they're actually being asked for them. Because I think, especially now, we've seen a lot of knee-jerk reactions to the pandemic, and that has led to a lot of lost funding in terms of desired, you know, whether a meaningful change will occur. And so I think as we look forward, you know, remote learning, remote training, these are things that aren't going to go away. This is now part of our life. And I think you'll see some people who had the opportunity to work from home now have found it to be something that they like, and ultimately, how can they do that moving forward? I think schools recognize, you know, and universities, that there's always going to be a remote learning component in the corporate space as well. So how do we now build upon the foundation we never thought we'd need because of this pandemic, but do so in a way that actually will produce greater outcomes for everyone looking forward? And Rushton, I know you know that I can be long-winded, so I tried to keep it under that 12-minute mark. So I hope we did a good job.
You did a fine job, and excellent to get you guys to spend some time with us and share these ideas. We're going to jump into the Q&A, but before we do, I want to introduce the people on the call. So if you have your camera on, I'll ask you that you wave when I call your name from our club. We have our membership chair, Farheen. All right. We have our president, Sviatko. We have our paella master, Shag Shagrin. And from Germany, one of our newest members, Manu. Good to have you with us as well. All right. So to start things off, I'm going to ask our team to start putting things in the chat as they identify that they have a question. Farheen, you have one, so why don't you start us off?
Great, perfect. Thank you so much for your presentation. It was really lovely to hear more about your organization. I have two questions, one quick one. Is Ready Learner One a play on Ready Player One?
Of course.
Okay, just wanted to make sure I understand. And then my second question is, so I am applying to medical school in a few weeks. And so I was wondering, do you do any kind of work with kind of med schools? Because I feel like this would be really kind of integrated with kind of medical technologies.
Yeah, we are currently developing a respiratory therapy, soft skills virtual reality course to help respiratory therapists know what it's like to work with a client. So that's one example. We have other ones. We're talking about some hard skills in the surgical world and using emergent tools to help train surgeons. You know, they're finding that paying for a cadaver, paying for sites, paying for tools, flying surgeons from around the world to one location can be very expensive. And if virtual reality can create an equal or better solution, that's where we're fitting in. Congratulations. Enjoy medical school.
Not yet. I'm applying. Not yet. So one more year.
You'll do great. I have no doubt.
I hope so.
Good luck.
One of my favorite statistics to share is Johnson & Johnson recently shared that they were training people for knee surgeries. And, you know, and Micah mentioned this, the travel piece, how oftentimes in order to train a surgeon, what you need to do is fly them down to one of those observation rooms where they're kind of looking from above. And in reality, I don't know what really great view or insight you're getting into actually performing the surgery from being in one of these observation booths. So they developed a VR training experience to have people trained to do this type of surgery and then put them out into the field and then see what the results were. And what they found was that 80% of the people who had gone through the virtual reality training for this knee surgery were able to perform the surgery on their first attempt with little to no guidance from someone else. Want to take a guess at what the percentage was for people who had done it just through the traditional observational format?
Much lower.
Zero.
Wow.
No. Everyone who had done the observational training needed some type of guidance in order to actually effectively do the training. So I think to Micah's point, you know, what we found is with a lot of the people we're working with that these VR types of experiences actually lead.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. So I recently had an opportunity to just try VR with the headset, and I really felt like I was a part of the world, right? I really felt like I was touching, you know, kind of moving things and touching things. So I could easily see a wonderful integration with VR, virtual reality, and medicine. So that's really cool. Thank you so much.
You just nailed, by the way, the biggest challenge, I think, with adoption of VR, which is you put on the headset. The question we have is, how do we get more people to put on the headset to get that same feeling that you have? Right now, if you put on the headset, you're in.
Yeah.
The challenge is, how do we get people to put on the headset?
It's true. I'm not gonna lie. I was kind of worried in the beginning. You know, I was like, what am I getting myself into with this gigantic thing? Do I look ridiculous? Because I know I did, but at the end of the day, it was super cool. So.
Yeah, but in VR, you look super cool. So it doesn't matter how you look out there.
Thanks.
Next question is from our president, Sviatko.
Hey guys, thanks so much for this presentation. It's very cool. So my question is about the so it seems like, if I understand this correctly, you service the K-12 and higher education space, and then you also have some corporate clients. Now, what would you say are some of the main differences? Are you know, the kids in schools a lot more receptive to this type of new technology than the corporate world?
Well, I think I'll jump in on that one. I think anytime we want to try something new, children are always faster to try. So there's that. But what we have found is that learning is learning. And so if you approach a training, or you approach a discussion, or you approach a prototype from the perspective of a later adopter, not your geekiest geek in the world, a later adopter. You know, you think about your parents or your grandparents. If they were going to try this new technology, what kind of conversation would you have to have with them about expectations and how might you prepare them? A lot of companies in this space have, specifically hardware companies, have failed because they relied so heavily on creating the geekiest thing in the world that only a geek can understand. In terms of the adoption curve, I think that's a poor business model. I don't know if I'm answering your question.
Yeah, thanks. I have maybe a second question if I can ask here. So in the educational space, how do you find that your methodology fits within regular curriculum, and is it readily applicable to any sort of teaching, or do you focus on specific subject matters?
So I can take this one if that's okay with you guys. And I apologize, my internet is a little unstable right now. So convenient. So if I'm choppy, just give me a signal and someone else to take over. So truth be told, using emerging technology to teach students really just makes all learning more accessible. And so we really strive as a company to make sure that schools and educators and anyone who's interested in using emerging technology for learning sees that it draws parallels across all content areas. So when we're talking specifically about the K-12 environment, whether you're teaching literacy skills or you're teaching math or you're teaching science, you're really teaching all of these things interconnectedly, because that's how our students are going to use them when they leave the school environment, right? And so one of the things that VR does is it really allows us to take the isolation out of the content areas and start to blend those content areas with each other and show students the connectedness of their learning, which is really powerful.
Very cool. One of the things that strikes me as you talk about this is that when people are going to learn anything, the degree to which they're engaged is clearly going to play out in the degree to which they learn it, right? And so if someone has a sense of this is going to be some boring thing, they're primed not to learn it well, right? Right. I did a training of some financial reps about a year and change ago, and telling about digital storytelling tools, and we worked in with those, but they got a chance to really play with it. And so for them, it was much more of an active, wow, this is something I can use kind of moment. I would guess that as you're getting people in VR and AR spaces, that they are responding similarly to, wow.
But I think there's not a catch. I think the trick here is, you know, when we talk about VR, there's this this perception that we're talking about the headset, and immersive VR is one of the things that we do talk about. But I think, you know, as a company, we have this belief that, you know, we need to meet learners where they are, and so that extends to a variety of different approaches and platforms. So, you know, we've developed content that is a traditional e-course. So something, you know, we have a cybersecurity course we developed that is a traditional through your website, actually following through as a training. One of the things that clients have really been drawn to, and to what we were talking about before with Farheen, you know, immersive VR, where I put on the headset and I'm kind of in it. But then there's a middle ground too. And that middle ground could be something like, which is VR that is not immersive. So if you've ever been in something like Google Street Views on your computer where you're navigating 360 photos, that technically, the definition of virtual reality is a digital environment. So that is by definition a form of VR, but it's not immersive. So we've been able to create training platforms for people that are virtual reality but non-immersive, meaning it's accessible on a type of device, so it doesn't feel as though someone has to take that huge leap that we said that we fear sometimes that some of our people who may be technology averse don't necessarily want to do. But I also think it's important, Russian, to your point about, you know, the cool factor. I think we've also run into times where clients have, and, you know, Micah tells this great story, which I'm going to tell for him right now, where a client came to him and was like, this is amazing, we want to use this. And we were like, yeah, but if we take a look at your learning and training objectives, this wouldn't be the right fit. So sometimes just the fact that it's being cool doesn't make it the right technology for you to use.
But it's great how it starts the conversation.
Yes.
I love that. It's a catalyst for, here, let's go through this experience. And then we always say, especially with immersive virtual reality for training purposes, the real quality from the training comes out of meaningful discussion. So what did you learn? How did it make you feel? Describe your sense of presence. How do you feel, your self-perception about approaching the tasks that we trained you on?
Very cool. Now, for a number of our members and guests, they may be hearing us talk about VR and AR and thinking, I really don't know what those are and what the distinctions might be. So if you were to do the short description of this is what augmented reality is, this is what virtual reality is, how would you jump forward on that?
Christine, you want to jump in?
Yeah, so I think I will use the very simplistic definition that I give every educator when I train them on the two technologies. And I think that this just applies to anybody who's not familiar with the terms. So AR, augmented reality, takes your current reality and enhances it. So it takes where you are and it adds a computer generated concept to it to enhance it. Whereas VR, virtual reality, completely replaces your reality through the use of a headset. And then you're in a completely alternative environment. So that's the most basic definitions. But Jesse or Micah, feel free to expand upon that because VR has really grown to far beyond just what's offered through a headset.
I think you nailed it. I think the only difference or the only differentiation I would make is I always break VR into two things: immersive VR, and then by definition, VR is replacing the real world with a digital environment, whether that environment is on your screen or your phone or in an immersive experience like a headset. I think that's how I would classify it. But people who often say, well, I'm not familiar with AR. If you've ever seen a Snapchat filter, you're familiar with AR. That's like the textbook definition of augmented reality. Pokemon Go, all of these different things that have been, coming in. And so the book Reality Bites was really our entry point, even though it was written with educators in mind. It was to really try to break down what those type of experiences are and to introduce this type of framework for integrating emergent technology into your your learning paradigm.
One of the coolest things we're seeing become more popular is actually mixed reality. I saw some people who, because of the pandemic, of course, they're at their houses, some developers for Unity, and they're going out of their minds. So they decided, I'm going to recreate my home as a tree house. So when you put on the virtual reality headset, you can actually walk up the stairs in the house, but you think or you see yourself climbing a tree. So that's mixing the stairs in the house with a virtual reality created space. So that's another interesting side of this we're going to see. Also some laser tag games where you go into a space and you have walls that are physical walls, but in laser tag, they're rendered to look like something different.
Cool. I know in your book, you give a lot of examples of resources that are out there. So could you pick one that you'd say, okay, if I'm running a small business, I'm running a company, and I want my people to have a certain kind of conversation. Can you kind of pull those together in a way that kind of speaks to how you work with folks?
With one, no. Everything is such a sliding scale. So there's one tool that we love called Warp VR, which is a 360 video that's great for empathy building and soft skills, customer service situations. For training people, what we call to blend or create to do things, that's not the best tool. You'll use something else like Google Blocks or Tilt Brush or specifically made products for that training experience. If they want to dabble, you can look at things like JigSpace. JigSpace is a great app with a lot of freemium features for a phone, and it will let you put into the room three-dimensional objects that you can walk around. And they have a new feature where you can share that with someone else, and together you can walk around a three-dimensional asset right in your room. So I'm not being cheeky with my comment, but there really isn't one thing. There's plenty of places to dabble, but it opens the door for a discussion about meaningful learning.
And I think just to add on to Micah's thing about the why you can't just put it into one thing, I think the answer to that is because these technologies offer us the ability to offer training in skills that previously were unable to be captured to offer formal training experiences. I think that's particularly true in the soft skills space. soft skills or training customer service reps besides giving them a manual or something like that. Those are previously very difficult things to do. And if you take a look at what some of the major corporations out there are doing, Walmart, for instance, had custom training created to train their managerial candidates on how to deal with difficult customers. Verizon has actually created an internal team. They have an entire team of VR designers who develop experiences like how to deal with an active shooter, how to deal with what if your store is being robbed. Things that you just really couldn't, you could make a manual, but you couldn't create the real active experiences for what to do. In terms of the hard skills, Micah talked about some of those. We were talking with a company who was trying to train their engineers on what happens, their electricians, with a transformer that has blown up and how to deal with that. Well, we're not going to blow up a transformer, and then have them go do that. But there's a way to create a simulation to give them the actual hands-on experience of dealing with that, so that when they go out and do that, it isn't such a burdensome task.
Shags.
Not so much a question, but a comment. I'm probably the oldest one in the room, and I'm showing my age here by saying the first time I ever experienced virtual reality was with a television show that was it was reruns, but it was called Winky Dink and You. It was produced, 1953 to 1957, and it was a cartoon where they had gaps, and part of this kit was that you put a screen on your TV screen, a plastic sheet, and it came with crayons, and you would put the wheels on the car to help Winky Dink escape. So that was part of the show, Winky Dink.
Awesome.
And so I just want to finish up by thanking you for your presentation. It was awesome. As one of the old past presidents of the room, it's my responsibility to start the applause.
Awesome. Well done, Shags.
Thank you.
So to all of our presenters, thank you very much. To all of our members and guests, you know what we want you to do, which is to let us know you were here. There is an attendance form just a little bit past where you've watched this video as part of the meeting. And then a little farther down, you'll see the discuss section. And there you can tell us what you thought of this program, of any of the other content in the meeting. You can ask questions. You can respond to other people's ideas. We like seeing people engage in that fashion, so we hope you will. If you are a guest and you properly do the attendance piece, that is, you put your email address in properly, you'll end up with an email that you can pass along to your club secretary for making up a miss from your own club. And we encourage you to think of our club as an anytime possibility for making up misses at your club. We always like to give the last word to our speakers, and I'll hand it over to the CEO of Ready Learner One, Micah. It's yours.
Well, thank you for listening to us. We know that just by watching the show, just by being in attendance, just by participating in your Rotary Club, that you take the business world very seriously, and you take serving other people very seriously. And we want you to know that we do too. And we're hoping that by our dialogue and by our presentation, that you understand the adoption process and how it can be very meaningful rather than just simply integrating the latest and greatest. Thank you for joining us. Bye.